Here we want to determine if a relation is a function. And one of the important things with a function is we want to make sure that each input corresponds to exactly one output, or each question corresponds to only one answer. And so in this case, we have a set of coordinates, 4 coordinates, and so we want to make sure that each x coordinate corresponds to exactly one y coordinate. So if I gather all the domain into a bubble, for example, so we have 1, 2, 3, and 4. Those are all my values of my domain. In my range, I have the value of 6, 6, 8, and 9. So if I look at it in that way, and I can see that when I have a 1, it corresponds to a 6. I have a 2, corresponds to a 6. I have a 3 that corresponds to an 8, and a 4 that corresponds to a 9. So in each case, every value that I have in my input or my domain corresponds to exactly one value. A little tricky here, you notice that there's 2 6s. That's all right when we look at it from this perspective, because every time I get a 1, it produces a 6. Every time I get a 2, it produces a 6. So I can say then that this relation is a function. But here's how it changes. Here's where it changes a little bit. So let me erase this. And let's just generate another set of numbers. So let's generate 6 and 1, 6 and 2, 8 and 3, and 9 and 4. So if I look at all my domain or my x values, I have a 6, 6, 8, and a 9. All of those represent my x values in this second relation, and I'm going to look at all my y values that correspond to that. I have a 1, a 2, a 3, and a 4. All those values are my domain or my y values. So to determine if it's a function, I need to look at, does 6 correspond to one number? In this case, 6 corresponds to a 1. Well, I have another 6, which is fine, but I'm expecting it has to correspond to a 1 for it to be a function. But in this case, it corresponds to a 2. So this second set of coordinates, this relation, is not a function. And the reason why it's not a function is because when I have a domain value or an input value, it needs to correspond to exactly 1. 6 always needs to correspond to a 1. But in this case, I see that 6 also corresponds to a 2. I have one question and I get 2 answers, kind of. So therefore, this particular set of coordinates is a relation, but it's not a function.